Welcome back to the channel, where we journey through the ages to uncover the stories that shaped our world. From the sparks of the first civilizations to the rise and fall of ancient empires, every era holds secrets waiting to be rediscovered. Today, we step once again into the forge of history, where fire, metal, and human ambition changed the course of civilization forever.
Imagine a world waking up from the long, slow rhythm of the Stone Age. For thousands of years, humanity relied on flint, bone, and wood to survive. But then, a spark of innovation changed everything. We discovered that by melting rocks, we could forge a material harder, sharper, and more durable than anything found in nature. This wasn't just a new tool. It was the spark that ignited the first true civilizations. We call this era the Bronze Age, a period stretching roughly from 3300 to 1200 BCE. It was a time when isolated villages coalesced into sprawling cities, and tribal chieftains rose to become god-kings. But why bronze? Why did this specific alloy of copper and tin become the catalyst for empires? The answer lies in the chemistry of the earth and the human drive to dominate the environment. Before bronze, there was copper. Humans had used copper for ornaments and simple tools, but pure copper is too soft for heavy warfare or deep agriculture. It bends when you strike it against a rock. The genius moment came when ancient smiths realized that adding a small amount of tin to the molten copper created a hybrid metal. This new alloy was a technological revolution comparable to the invention of the microchip. Celsius. This demanded the invention of complex kilns and charcoal fires fanned by bellows. It transformed metallurgy from a backyard experiment into an industrial operation. Suddenly, you needed specialized workers, miners, and traders, creating a completely new social hierarchy centered around the forge. With this harder metal, farmers could plow deeper into the tough soil of river valleys, accessing nutrients that wooden plows could never reach. This led to massive agricultural surpluses. For the first time in history, not everyone had to be a farmer. Society could afford to feed soldiers, priests, scribes, and kings. The metal plow literally paved the way for the complex bureaucracy of the state. Let's look at the cradle of this civilization, Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Here, the Sumerians built the world's first true cities, like Uruk and Ur. These weren't just large villages. They were walled metropolises with tens of thousands of residents, organized streets, and monumental architecture. They were islands of order in a chaotic world. At the heart of these cities stood the ziggurat, a massive stepped pyramid distinct from the Egyptian smooth-sided ones. These were artificial mountains built to bring the priests closer to the gods. Religion wasn't a private matter. It was the central engine of the state. The gods owned the land, and the kings were merely their managers, collecting taxes in the form of grain and wool to store in the temple complex. To manage these taxes and trade deals, the Sumerians invented something even more powerful than bronze: writing. It started as simple pictures drawn on wet clay to count sacks of wheat, but it evolved into cuneiform. These wedge-shaped marks were the first time humanity froze their thoughts in time. We know their laws, their receipts, and their stories because they baked them into the earth. While Mesopotamia rose in the east, another giant was waking up in the west, Egypt. Blessed by the predictable flooding of the Nile, Egypt developed a civilization focused on eternity. Unlike the warring city-states of Mesopotamia, Egypt was a unified kingdom protected by deserts on both sides. This isolation allowed their culture to remain remarkably stable for 3,000 years. The pharaoh was not just a king, he was a living god. the intersection of the divine and the human. During the Bronze Age, specifically the Old Kingdom, they channeled the labor of the entire nation to build the Pyramids of Giza. These weren't built by slaves, as often rumored, but by paid laborers and farmers working during the flood season, motivated by faith and national pride. Beyond the Big Two, the Bronze Age was a global phenomenon. In the Indus Valley, the cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro featured urban planning that wouldn't be matched for centuries, including functional sewer systems and grid-like streets. They were trading partners with Mesopotamia, exchanging teak, ivory, and lapis lazuli across the ocean, proving that globalization is not a modern invention. Further east, in China, the Shang dynasty mastered bronze casting to an artistic level never seen before. They created massive, intricate ritual vessels used to offer food and wine to ancestors. These weren't just functional, they were complex masterpieces of mold making, featuring Tao-Ti animal masks and dragons, symbolizing the terrifying power of the natural world. What truly defined the Bronze Age, however, was trade. Bronze is an alloy of copper and tin, but these two metals are rarely found in the same place. Copper is common, but tin is rare, often found thousands of miles away in places like Afghanistan or Cornwall. This geological fact forced civilizations to build massive international trade networks. The Mediterranean Sea became a superhighway. The Minoans on the island of Crete built the first thalassocracy, an empire of the sea. Their palace at Knossos was a labyrinth of colorful frescoes and storerooms, lacking defensive walls because their navy was their wall. They were the middlemen, the shippers who connected the raw materials of the barbarians to the palaces of the kings. Warfare in the Bronze Age was a spectacle of chariots. Around 1700 BCE, the invention of the spoked wheel and the domestication of the horse created the tank of the ancient world. The chariot allowed archers to rain death from a moving platform. Battles weren't just mobs of infantry anymore. They were high-speed, tactical maneuvers dominated by the elite warrior class who could afford these expensive war machines. One of the most famous battles of this era was the Battle of Kadesh, fought between the Egyptian Empire under Ramesses the Great and the Hittite Empire. It is the earliest battle in history where we have detailed tactics and formations recorded by both sides. Thousands of chariots clashed in what was essentially a draw, leading to the world's first known peace treaty.
But the Bronze Age was not just about kings and battles. It was about the common person's struggle. Life was short and brutal. Most people were subsistence farmers, owing their labor to the palace. If the harvest failed, you starved. If the king went to war, you died. There was no middle class as we know it, only the very top and the very bottom.
This delicate balance of trade, agriculture, and centralized authority worked for centuries. We call this the International Age of the Bronze Age. Kings wrote letters to each other calling one another brother. They exchanged gold, princesses, and physicians. It was a globalized economy that felt too big to fail. But systems that are complex are also fragile. Around 1200 BCE, the impossible happened. In a period of just 50 years, almost every major city in the eastern Mediterranean was destroyed or abandoned. The Hittite Empire vanished. The Mycenaean Greeks collapsed into a dark age. Egypt barely survived. This event is known as the Late Bronze Age collapse, and it remains one of history's greatest murder mysteries. What caused the apocalypse? It wasn't just one thing. Evidence points to a perfect storm of catastrophes. We see signs of massive earthquakes, a mega-drought that lasted decades, causing famine and internal rebellions. And then there were the Sea Peoples, mysterious confederations of raiders who swept across the Mediterranean, burning everything in their path. The collapse broke the complex trade routes. Without tin, you couldn't make bronze. The international economy evaporated. Writing systems like Linear B were lost and forgotten. For centuries, humanity in this region slid back into illiteracy and isolation. The light of civilization didn't go out, but it dimmed significantly, leaving survivors to scavenge among the ruins of giants. To understand the Bronze Age fully, we have to look deeper into the metallurgy. The specific ratio was usually 88% copper and 12% tin. If you added too much tin, the metal became brittle and shattered in battle. Too little, and your sword would bend. It was the first true chemistry, requiring precise measurement and experimentation. This need for tin drove explorers to the ends of the known world. We have found amber from the Baltic Sea in the tombs of Egyptian pharaohs and Mesopotamian seals in the Indus Valley. The world was connected by a web of brave merchants who walked thousands of miles beside donkeys loaded with precious cargo.
Let's zoom in on the Uluburun shipwreck. Discovered off the coast of Turkey, this ship sank around 1300 BCE. Its cargo contained goods from at least 7 different cultures: copper from Cyprus, tin from Afghanistan, glass from Egypt, and ivory from Africa. It is a time capsule of global trade sitting on the ocean floor. In Mesopotamia, the Code of Hammurabi gave us one of the first written set of laws. Carved onto a massive basalt stele, it declared an eye for an eye. It showed that the state was taking over justice from the chaotic vengeance of tribes. Justice was no longer arbitrary, it was written in stone. Meanwhile, the Minoans in Crete were enjoying a different life. Their art celebrates nature, bull-leaping sports, and women in high-status positions. Unlike the rigid, war-focused art of the mainland, Minoan art is fluid and joyous, suggesting a society that felt safe and prosperous behind their naval shield. But the mainland Greeks, the Mycenaeans, were different. They were the people of the Iliad and the Odyssey. They built massive citadels with cyclopean walls, stones so huge that later generations believed only giants could have moved them. They were a warrior culture, raiding and trading in equal measure. In the east, the Hittites established a massive empire in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. They were masters of the chariot and early adopters of iron experimentation. They were the great rivals of Egypt, constantly fighting for control of the trade routes in the Levant, the bridge between Africa and Asia. Religion in the Bronze Age was transactional. You didn't just pray, you offered. You sacrificed animals, food, and wine to keep the sun rising and the rivers flowing. The temples were essentially the national banks, storing the wealth of the nation under the protection of the gods. Writing also allowed for the first literature. The Epic of Gilgamesh, written in Sumer, tells the story of a king seeking immortality. It contains a flood myth that predates the Bible, showing how these ancient stories rippled through time and influenced the cultures that followed. We must also talk about the role of climate. The Bronze Age civilizations were hydraulic empires. They depended entirely on water management. In Egypt, the Nile flood was measured in nilometers. If it was too low, famine. Too high, destruction. Their entire theology was based on the cycles of the river.
This environmental dependence is likely what killed them. Evidence from pollen samples and sediment cores shows a massive centuries-long dry period starting around 1200 BCE. When the rain stopped, the crops failed. When the crops failed, the palace couldn't feed the soldiers. And when the soldiers weren't fed, the barbarians at the gates broke through.
The Sea Peoples are the great villains of this story, but they were likely refugees themselves. Fleeing famine in their own lands, they took to the sea with their families, looking for food. They weren't just an army, they were a migration, a desperate wave of humanity crashing into the weakened empires. Egypt fought them off, but the cost was too high. Ramesses III defeated the Sea Peoples, recording his victory on the walls of Medinet Habu, but the war drained the treasury. Egypt survived, but it was a shadow of its former self, never again regaining the power it held during the height of the Bronze Age. The collapse was swift. The great palace economies, where the king controlled all production, simply stopped working. Without the central administration to organize the grain distribution, people fled the cities. The population of Greece dropped by perhaps 75%. It was a true apocalypse for the people living through it. But dark ages are rarely pitch black. In the vacuum left by the great empires, smaller states began to rise. The Phoenicians, operating out of city-states like Tyre and Sidon, picked up the pieces of maritime trade. They simplified writing into a phonetic alphabet, the ancestor of the very letters you are reading right now. In the hills of Canaan, another group was emerging, the Israelites. The collapse of the big powers allowed these smaller tribal confederations to settle and eventually form kingdoms like Israel and Judah. The spiritual shift began to move from the state gods of the Ziggurats to more personal monotheistic concepts. The transition to iron was the final nail in the coffin of the Bronze Age. Iron ore is found in swamps and rocks almost everywhere. You didn't need a trade network to get it. Once the technique of smelting iron was mastered, the elite chariot warrior lost his advantage. A peasant with an iron spear could now kill a king. When you look at the world today, remember the Bronze Age. Remember the smelters who first turned rock into metal. Remember the scribes who first wrote down a name. And remember that even the greatest empires can fall if the climate shifts and the systems break. It is a lesson from the past for the future.
We've covered the tools, the cities, and the collapse. But what about the art? Bronze Age art was the first time we see realistic portraiture. The mask of Agamemnon, the bust of Nefertiti, these aren't just symbols, they are faces. We are looking into the eyes of people who lived 3 millennia ago. And let's not forget the women of the Bronze Age. Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh who ruled Egypt with a fake beard and iron will. Enheduanna, the Sumerian priestess who was the first named author in all of history. Women held power, owned property, and wrote poetry.
The medical knowledge of the time was also surprising. The Edwin Smith Papyrus from Egypt describes surgery, setting broken bones, and even treating brain injuries. They didn't have antibiotics, but they had logic, observation, and a desire to heal. Astronomy was another Bronze Age necessity. To farm, you need a calendar. To have a calendar, you need to watch the stars. They mapped the constellations, tracked the planets, and built monuments like Stonehenge, which was active during the Bronze Age, to align with the solstices. Music, too, filled their halls. We have found the remains of lyres, flutes, and drums. The Hurrian hymn, found on a clay tablet, is the oldest known melody in the world. Imagine the sounds of a lyre echoing through the halls of Babylon or Thebes. The food they ate would be familiar to us: bread, beer, onions, lentils, mutton. But the Bronze Age was also the era of the first wine trade. The elites drank wine imported from the Zagros Mountains or Greece, while the commoners drank thick, nutritious beer. Hygiene was a concern for the elite. The palaces of Crete had flushing toilets and bathtubs. Egyptians were obsessed with cleanliness, shaving their bodies and using oils and perfumes to combat the heat and lice. They invented the first deodorants.
So, as we close the book on the Bronze Age, we see a mirror of ourselves. They were builders, traders, warriors, and dreamers. They faced global challenges and technological revolutions.
Their story is the first chapter of our story.
The Bronze Age left us an indelible legacy. It gave us the wheel, the sailboat, the calendar, writing, and the very concept of the city. It taught us that we can reshape the earth to suit our needs, but it also warned us that complex societies are vulnerable to climate change and systemic collapse. The ruins of their empires are the foundation of our own.
We are still children of the Bronze Age. Every time you sign a contract, live in a city, or use a metal tool, you are echoing the innovations of those ancient people who first looked at a rock and saw a sword. They stepped out of the stone and into the fire, forging the future we live in today.
If you enjoyed this journey through the forge of history, make sure to like and subscribe. We have many more eras to explore, from the Iron Age to the Industrial Revolution. Let us know in the comments which ancient civilization fascinates you the most. Until next time.